All right, I know this sounds crazy, but the most important person in Back to the Future isn't Doc Brown, it's not Marty McFly, it's this lady. Yep, it's the lady shaking a coffee can full of quarters. It's the woman handing out flyers and yelling at Marty McFly right in his face as he's trying to kiss Jennifer. She gives him the flyer. This paper is the most crucial, the most important item in the entire franchise. Without this, Marty will never know where the lightning strike is going to be. No 1.21 gigawatts, and Marty is stuck in 1955 forever. Plus, she's fundraising for reasons that don't make sense.
Mayor Wilson is sponsoring an initiative to replace that clock.
And then, at the end of the movie, when this happens, well, if that hadn't happened, Doc would have unwittingly created a time paradox that would have destroyed the entire universe.
Save the clock tower! Save the clock tower! Save the clock tower!
So who is this clock tower saving crusader? She's out there handing out flyers and collecting donations to not fix the clock.
Mayor Wilson is sponsoring an initiative to replace that clock. We at the Hill Valley Preservation Society think it should be preserved exactly the way it is.
Seriously, who raises money to not fix something? Send me some money. I'll never fix a clock again. The actress who played the Save the Clock Tower lady is Elsa Raven. Her real name was Elsa Rabinowitz, and she was born in 1929 in Charleston, South Carolina. This is probably her best known role, but she also appeared in a lot of other movies and TV shows. You probably saw her in the movie Titanic. She was playing Ida Strauss, one of the two owners of Macy's. Ida and her husband really were on the Titanic, and Ida had a chance to get on a lifeboat but didn't want to leave without her husband, which is why this might be the saddest moment in that entire movie. Elsa also appeared on an episode of Family Ties. She supervised the chess match between Alex P. Keaton and a Russian chess whiz.
Gentlemen, what is the meaning of this?
Other versions of the script didn't have the Save the Clock Tower lady at all. As a matter of fact, the earliest versions of the Back to the Future script didn't have the time machine as a DeLorean. They were using a refrigerator to travel through time, and the way they did it was to nuke the fridge.
Damn.
Doc would take that refrigerator out to the atomic testing site and wait for the bomb to go off. Eventually, they decided a refrigerator wasn't the way to go, and they went with the DeLorean. But even the first version of the DeLorean script doesn't have anything about saving the clock tower. Again, the ending scene took place on an atomic testing site. Now, you probably know that Eric Stoltz was hired to play Marty McFly and eventually was replaced by Michael J. Fox. Well, the Eric Stoltz version of the script did have the Save the Clock Tower lady, and that version was turned into the Back to the Future novelization. In the book, she's very specific that she does not want the clock fixed. Mayor Wilson is sponsoring an initiative to save or repair that clock. We at the Hill Valley Preservation Society think it should be preserved exactly the way it is as part of our history and heritage. We at the Society feel it's a landmark of scientific importance, attesting the power of the Almighty. Now, Eric Stoltz shot a lot of the movie, and then they had to reshoot it with Michael J. Fox, but he did not shoot this scene because they started with the 1950s scenes and then dirtied everything up, aged everything, and shot the 1980s scenes. But they didn't get to the courthouse square scenes with Eric Stoltz. And had they done that, not only would they have had Eric Stoltz, but they would have had a different Jennifer. Claudia Wells was hired to act opposite Michael J. Fox, but acting opposite Eric Stoltz was Melora Hardin. You probably know her from The Office. And she wasn't playing Jennifer Parker, she was playing Susie Parker.
Don't forget to take a flyer.
Now, the reason Marty keeps the flyer is because she says she's going to be at her grandma's.
I'll call you tonight.
I'll be at my grandma's.
There were no cell phones back then. People left their homes back then and were unreachable.
That's the power of clocks, T.
And then she gave him a fake number. Originally, 555, then known as Klondike 5, was the number you would call for directory assistance. And then the telephone companies decided they would give this exchange to the motion pictures so that way people wouldn't be getting phone calls from people that had seen a movie that gave out a real phone number. In the 1970s and 80s, you had lots of prominent scenes with 555 numbers. Ghostbusters was one.
We're ready to believe you.
Last Action Hero.
555-3812. Amazing. I'm willing to bet that everyone has a 555 number.
So?
But eventually audiences started getting hip to the fact that it was a phony number. Currently, 555-0100 to 555-0199 are all reserved for motion pictures, but they generally don't use them anymore. The studios now will purchase a phone line and they'll use that real number in the movie. So you know what happens next. Marty gets sent back in time and he's sitting there with Doc and he's like, I can't stay here in 1955. I got a girl. And Doc, who's like passed out on the couch, wakes up and goes,
Is she pretty?
what was Doc expecting? No, Doc, she's got a nice personality. Is she a babe? And then Marty answers with what is a total non sequitur. He's like,
Look what you wrote here, Doc. I mean, that says it all.
and Doc doesn't even look at it. But then Doc says all we need to know is about a bolt of lightning.
Unfortunately, you never know when or where it's ever going to strike.
Says save the clock tower, tells us the date. Below the headline, it actually tells us that it stopped at 10:04. And we see a picture of the clock. And then all of this text is just gibberish. This is a common thing that they'll do in movies. Since you can't read it when it's on screen, it doesn't matter what it said. But none of this actually says anything about that clock.
This is the answer.
So the flyer became the golden ticket for Marty to go home. But the truth is, he shouldn't have it anymore. It's 1:15 a.m. when he goes to the mall and gets sent back in time. He should have already called Jennifer before that when he got home. She was only going to be at her grandma's that night. She didn't say, I'll be at my grandma's for the next week. She was going to be at the grandma's that night. So he should have taken it out of his pocket and called her. And then if he was going to save the number, he would save this in his room. He wouldn't put it back in his pocket. So either she called him, or he forgot to call her altogether and fell asleep in his clothes and then got the camera and went down there. Now, the lightning striking the clock tower is kind of odd. If we start out in 1985, we can see that there was a lightning rod on the roof and it is completely melted. This isn't how lightning rods are supposed to work. This is a remarkably rare thing that this would happen. And I know it's a movie and all of this happened so that it could be a movie. The purpose of a lightning rod is that if lightning is striking anywhere around there, it will draw it to that lightning rod and then it will go through the lightning rod down some kind of conduit or wire and away from the building, causing no part of the building to actually be struck by lightning. But something must have been hooked up wrong here. The lightning rod must have been hooked up to nothing so that when it got struck by lightning, the power and the electricity went right into the clock. Doc has now set this up so that the lightning rod is going to attach directly to a wire that will then go down across the street. But the tree branch falls and disconnects it. So Doc has to reconnect things and he wraps it around the hands of the clock. Here's the thing, if Doc hadn't had this problem, the clock wouldn't have broken, which means the lady would have never been there handing this out, which means he would have never known when the lightning was going to come, which means he would have been trapped in 1955.
This also which could cause a chain reaction that would unravel the very fabric of the space-time continuum and destroy the entire universe.
Now, it's interesting that the Hill Valley Preservation Society wants to keep the clock broken. Historically, there have been many examples of towns that have broken clocks.
It's been 30 years since the 200-foot-high clock was working in the Holyoke City Hall Tower. And when the clock strikes midnight on the 4th of July, the clock will light up and tell time once again.
San Francisco's Samuel clock was broken, then it was repaired, and then it broke again. Here's one thing to unpack. Mayor Goldie Wilson was all about progress and he wanted to replace that clock. And I can only imagine that he wanted to replace it with a digital clock because these were super popular in the 1980s. Every bank, every school would have one of these clocks with the time and temperature. And these things are not nearly as classy or nice as even a broken clock. The Save the Clock Tower lady has a point. I mean, this clock has a great history. We see it in part 3 in 1885 when it's being dedicated, and Marty and Doc get to take a picture in front of it. And actually, you see it a little earlier in the film. They go to speak to the conductor to try to find out how fast they could get the train going, and you can see the clock in the background.
Near 70 out past Verde Junction. Well, do you think it's possible to get it up to 90?
You also see Clara in the background waiting for Doc to pick her up. I didn't notice this till I saw this movie for like the 50th time. I noticed this after I noticed that one of Doc and Clara's kids was pointing at his wiener. I want to give a huge shout out to everybody on Patreon who does send me money to make sure I never fix a clock. Shout out to Aaron Wester, Al, Archer, Bucky and Oliver, Carson Loveridge, Dana Snyder, M, Jason Evans, Jason Yealy, Jarrett Rusky, Jamie and Tom, Jen, Matthew Chapin, Mike and Jess, my big brother Rob, and Nick Roche. Well, that's going to do it for this one. Don't forget to take a flyer. I'll see you next time.